The Ink and Paint Club podcast is intended for mature audiences. I know we're usually talking about kids' cartoons and stuff, but there's going to be naughty language. Anyway, listener discretion is advised.
So we're going to talk about Peter Cottontail today, right? Because it's Easter, so we're going to talk about that movie.
No, Alex, we're going to talk about the acclaimed live-action hybrid movie, Hop, starring Sonic the Hedgehog's James Marsden.
And, of course, beloved actor Russell Brand as the titular character, Hop.
Oh, God, I forgot he was in that.
Yeah. There was that weird time in history where Russell Brand was just in everything.
He sure was.
You're listening to the Ink and Paint Club podcast, a proud member of the Geekly Grind Podcast Network.
Hey, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to the Ink and Paint Club podcast. My name is JD, and I'm joined by a good friend of mine. His name is Alex.
Hello, I'm Alex.
Yes, Alex is a coworker of mine, and he and I just kind of shoot the shit about cartoons a lot of the time at work. So, first off, yeah, exactly. I just want to start off by apologizing. We have been pretty absent the last few months. Just been a lot of scheduling issues and all that. But hopefully, we'll get back into regular episodes here soon. So, but Alex, thank you for joining me today. I know you were not the biggest fan of the movie we're reviewing today. If I take your responses yesterday.
I mean, Fritz the Cat, possibly one of America's most beloved cats. It wasn't. I don't think it was a bad movie. I do think that he, as a character, is pretty scummy.
Well, yeah. But yeah, like Alex said, we are going to be reviewing Fritz the Cat. It is the world's first X-rated animated film. It is celebrating its 50th anniversary, which when I thought about that, and I'm like, wait a minute, when did this movie come out? And now I feel kind of old thinking that the 70s are 50 years ago.
I wouldn't know. I wasn't even alive then.
I know, right? Yeah, so this movie has gained a lot of clout and a lot of controversy over the years, especially when it came out, because back in the early 70s, just adult animated films were not something that were really a thing that was done. And Ralph Bakshi, who you may have heard of, has done a lot of like really odd animated films over the years. I think probably one of his most well known is he did a adaptation of Lord of the Rings in the late 70s. And this is based on a comic strip by R. Crumb, who is a very well-known old school comic artist. I kind of wish Kyle was here because he probably would have a lot more to say about that.
Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia is a wealth of knowledge.
Yes. Edited by me, so no one can say I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've watched this movie before years ago, and I'm not gonna say I hate the movie, but it is very of its time, and I feel like I was not the target demographic in the sense that I was not around in the time that I'm sure a lot of the themes of this movie were speaking to. But Alex, you said this was your first time watching it, right?
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch it for a while, but this gave me an excuse to actually get around to watching it.
Yeah. So outside of your just blatant dislike of the main character, which honestly I feel is kind of the point, how are you feeling after watching this finally?
I kind of felt like the movie itself, while some of the situations that Fritz gets himself into might be a tad antiquated nowadays, I do think that the core idea of the movie definitely still rings true to a certain extent.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because I mean, Fritz is just a lot of like fighting the power and really trying to gain independence, and just finds doing it in all the most like anarchist ways of just like sex and drugs and pornography and just all the most debauchery things you could think of in the 70s and honestly today too. And it's just watching him kind of stumble his way through early adulthood in this kind of like really kind of troubling time, I guess, with just like so much changing in the world.
Yeah, I took it in a very different way than that. I didn't look at it as Fritz gaining independence. I kind of saw the movie as the writers sort of making fun of the college artist, if you will. As Fritz's whole thing is that he's basically he wants to be a writer, but he wants to be a writer not because he wants to gain any kind of fame or really have his ideas spouted by anyone. He wants to become a writer just so he can get laid and have a sense of self-importance that he wouldn't otherwise have.
Right.
And he doesn't really have any life experience to go off of. So he kind of puts himself in these situations where he has no idea the full depth of what he's talking about with these people who've actually experienced hardship. And then he'll spend like maybe an hour or two with them and then be like, oh, I get what you guys are all about now. I understand.
Yeah, and it's even more telling that the fact that he's always talking out of his ass like he knows way more than he actually does. And no, I'm totally with you in the fact that like Fritz is completely a scummy character, and I don't think you're supposed to like him.
No, and I think that one of the scenes that I think would still hold up well today, in particular, is when he goes to the crow bar and he's talking to one of the crows and he's like, listen, man, I understand what you guys are all about. Like, trust me, I've read all the books about your plight. And, as a cat, I just feel just terrible about what my people have done to your people. And, I feel that kind of guilt deep inside. So I'm all tormented too, you see. And I couldn't help but think, man, that kind of hits the nail on the head for a lot of young college people that haven't quite gotten the world experience and understanding of the actual race issues that people face, and they just kind of go into conversations not understanding the full scope of how much of an opinion or how much of a impact they can really have on it because they've read a bunch of stuff but they don't really experience it. And I thought Fritz is exactly like a freshman in college that you would expect, who just doesn't have that wealth of knowledge yet.
And it's almost like in trying so hard to be understanding and not racist, it almost circles around to being kind of racist.
Well, Fritz is pretty racist in certain regards, not intentionally, like you said. Like when he asks for a drink from one of the crow bartender, he's like, "Hey boy, give me a shot of whiskey," and everybody in the booth turns to him and they're like, "We're gonna murder you because you just said something super freaking racist, dude."
It's like he goes through his entire life like thinking he's like this cool, very enlightened kind of character, but he's so unintentionally racist and sexist towards literally everyone around him that it's funny in a sense, but in the same time you can't help but wince a little bit every time he like does something to himself is unintentional but is nonetheless horrible to someone else. So like you're saying how he's just very unintentionally racist to all the crows, which are like, I get is so having a lot of the stuff. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of stuff in this movie, the way it portrays certain things, I do, especially in our culture nowadays, I don't think you could get away with, even if you're saying that it is something trying to say something or it's parody or anything. Like, look, having black people represented by crows in an animal universe, I thought we kind of drew the line back in Dumbo, but I guess a couple of years after that, we're like, okay, we're still doing this, I guess.
I do think that having something like that in today's times would definitely not fly. I think people would be more fixated on that than anything else in the movie. So I think Fritz the Cat is definitely a product of its time, and it's certain representation, especially the way that some of the crows acted in the bar, well, and just around town in general. I don't think would be considered a very good representation today, and definitely wasn't a good representation back then. But especially now, if anybody saw that movie would be critically panned and buried as quickly as it could.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's just it's hard to really, I don't know. I'm purely speaking from my modern sensibility. is that it is hard to enjoy this film. Again, because I was not alive in the 70s, and I'm sure this is speaking to a lot of social issues that were prevalent back in the day. But also just because nowadays we're presented with all of these different interpretations of these issues, it seems very scummy and very uncomfortable. And maybe that's how it was supposed to be taken back then, as being uncomfortable. But like, I think having the main character that we have, I don't know if these social issues were meant to be portrayed in a serious context, if that makes any sense.
I don't think that they were meant to be portrayed in a serious context. I think that they were meant to show that there are people out there who actually do have to deal with daily struggles, and that those are the types of people that often have the most important to say on any kind of social or life situation. And Fritz, of course, never having experienced any of that himself, just kind of walks into the situation and tries to insert himself into it, but he's very ignorant about it, so he fails at it miserably.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I do think that, weirdly enough, I do think that the movie does help illustrate the fact that, you know, white people, or Fritz in this situation, are part of a very special and privileged class of people. Because they don't have to deal with the daily hardships of, you know, having cops harass them, or having cops, you know, like, plant drugs on them, and not dealing with, you know, essentially being born into poverty. Like, Fritz wasn't born into poverty, but I think a lot of the crows in the bar are supposed to be portrayed as such. And not having drugs in their neighborhood constantly. So, like, smoking weed is such an event for Fritz, because he's never been around that stuff his entire life. So I do think it does a good job of being like, you know, hey, you know, white people are privileged, that they've never had to deal with these issues in their entire life. And I think that message would hold up pretty well today, but I think that the way in which it's portrayed would definitely not hold up. And I honestly, during that entire scene, I couldn't help but think to myself, like, wow, this is so, like, far away from how far, like, we've come in the movie industry and the animation industry. It's bizarre to look at, like, something like that now, after having experienced all the movies that have come out since, like, I would say 2017 up till now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think in the kind of themes that this movie is portraying, we've definitely come a long way in the way that we can more tactfully talk about it, and not making such an extravagant spectacle out of it, I guess, but talking about it more in a serious tense of, like, you know, drugs and race are very serious issues to talk about. And rather than trying to, I hesitate to say making light of, because I don't think this movie necessarily does that, but I think we've found better ways to talk about this in media, you know, since then.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think the movie. I agree that I don't think the movie does make light of drug and race use, because, I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, Fritz literally incites a race riot in one scene.
He sure does.
He's just an idiot, and he keeps telling he gets everybody in the neighborhood riled up, and he's like, we need to rise against the boss. And it's like, Fritz, you have no idea what you're talking about, and you're gonna get all these people.
You are an analog for a privileged white person. You are the man.
You are the oppressor. Congrats, Fritz. Now rebel against yourself and get the fuck out.
Exactly.
Jeremy Snow here, owner and editor-in-chief of The Geekly Grind. I'm interrupting your awesome, regularly scheduled programming to ensure that you know about our Geekly Grind podcast network, of which this show is a treasured member of. If you haven't had a chance to check out our site, you can do so at www.thegeeklygrind.com, and while you're there, check out the other members of our steadily growing podcast family, including the anime-centric Blake and Spencer Get Jumped, discovering new heroes and comic book keepers with Chris and Lance, exploring the vast universe of geekdom with Geeksploration, or of course appreciating animation's finer details with the Ink and Paint Club. Escape your weekly grind at The Geekly Grind.
Oh, man. But I think for as many of the problems this movie has, especially nowadays, I do think it's an important film to watch. I'm saying this in the sense that if you have not seen this movie before, I think it's an important piece of media to watch. I think if only for where it sits in animation history, because it was the first like mainstream X-rated animated film, and they wore that badge proudly. So,
yeah, for sure. I was reading up on it. Basically the entire point of the movie, and I think that's why we see so much nudity and sex in it, because they specifically wanted it to be an adult-only animated film, and they tried their absolute hardest to get that.
Yeah, because I mean, when this came out, this is still in the era of like Disney ruled animated cinema, and like adult animation film was just not something you did. Like cartoons were for kids. You didn't make it for adults. But I mean, nowadays we're in like a fucking golden age of adult animation. But it took us 50 years to get there.
It took us a long time and a lot of Family Guy clones to get where we are today.
Oh god, and there's still some of those around, Family Guy itself included. But I do think for what this movie did for animation, and like I think it even paves the way for a lot of like I'd say that like you probably wouldn't have like Family Guy, South Park, like or even like The Simpsons or anything had this movie not at least started to pave the way for allowing animation to be geared more I'd say adults, but more of a more general audience rather than just aiming towards children.
Yeah, I would say so. I feel like Fritz the Cat, if it was like a TV show, probably would have been on Adult Swim. That's kind of the vibe it gives off.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that if you have not seen this movie, I think it's important to watch. I would put a giant caveat saying that it is definitely not for everybody, especially if you are sensitive to these kind of explicit themes. But if you what?
I was gonna say like certain portrayals of race is a big one, I would say.
Yeah. But like I keep saying, it's definitely an important watch if it's something you feel like you could stomach.
Do you think that it had to be as edgy as it needed to be in order to get that adult rating? Like, do you think that like if they had like maybe toned down the nudity or even like the sex scenes, do you think that it still would have gotten the point across that hey, this is an adult movie? Or do you think they made it that way so that like it would be almost impossible to edit in case any studio wanted to get a hold of it and try to edit it for kids?
So I don't think the themes presented in the film, I don't think there's any way you could edit this down to be child friendly, even without the explicit sex and drugs. I just think the themes are too adult oriented. Is probably the word I'm wanting to use here, but I do think you could tone down a lot in this film and still make it for adults. To me, it just seemed like they went so hard in the one direction of like, okay, what adult themes are cartoons these days missing, and what can we do to really push that, and sex and drugs and race and putting that center stage like that, I think was their way of like really putting their foot down. Like, this is for adults only. This is not a children's animated film. But yeah, I definitely think they could cut down a lot of the gratuitous sex and a lot of the more extreme imagery, and I think you could still get your point across just as well. But I think it was nonetheless important that the movie is the way it is, because it only works that way in retrospect.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that the movie probably could have been toned down, but I think that the nature of it having to be that way, just at the time, I do think it was more of a statement about adult animation in general. JD, here's an uncomfortable question for you. What was the worst portrayal? The race portrayal or the woman portrayal in the movie? Because this movie is super freaking like sexist as well, like to a hyper degree.
Oh yeah, no, just I think I'm gonna have to give it to the racism. I think is worse. I do not want to equate that blatant and overt sexism is okay in any sense, but I think just the racist crows, man. I think that's all I need to say.
Such a big part of the movie too.
Yeah. No, it definitely leaves an impact.
I do like some of the visuals in the movie. Honestly, when they showed the city, I thought of Hey Arnold. I don't know why. Just the way that the city was drawn, it made me think of Hey Arnold.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and also the scene where I think his name was Duke, the crow that was trying to befriend Fritz. His death scene with the billiard balls going into the different holes. That was a really good death scene, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing to give it credit for is like, especially for the time, I do think this movie is well animated and has a lot of interesting animation imagery, and I kind of lost my train of thought. But you know what I mean, like like you're saying, it has all these very it definitely feels like it's an independent film where they can just kind of like be as artsy as they want to be, to really kind of like emphasize certain scenes, but like, yeah, like I said, for like an early 70s, like an independent movie, like it's actually pretty well animated.
Yeah, I was honestly kind of surprised because it was my understanding that this was like a wholly independent movie, and it, like, the animation in it was incredible, and I think that's probably my favorite part of the entire thing, was just watching all the different animation that was in it.
Yeah, for sure.
I did read up that the original creator of Fritz the Cat, the comic creator, he did not like the movie because he thought that it made fun of the left too much, and he was a hard leftist at the time.
Right.
Like, the movie made fun of the left too much. I think that's true, but I think it doesn't make fun of leftist issues. I think it makes more fun of just uneducated leftist people, and it also does take a couple of really hard jabs at rightist politics as well. Like during the riot scene in Fritz, the U.S. military comes in, cheered by the silhouette of Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and Donald Duck, and they just bomb the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, being real subtle there.
Gee, I wonder what they think about Disney.
I can only wonder. Yeah.
I wasn't expecting the Nazi anarchist rabbit. Now that was a turn I didn't see.
Yeah, I always felt that kind of comes out of nowhere. It's a very weird scene, and honestly, and I feel like that's kind of how this movie operates. It's one of those movies where there is some kind of connective tissue between events, but it just kind of is Fritz stumbling from one situation to the other. So having him stumble into this like fucking Nazi biker guy who's like tweaked out of his fucking head, like, is not out of place in this movie, but also I do just feel is kind of random.
I did think that going so far as to have Fritz basically become a terrorist was a very interesting choice for the 70s. Today would be a huge piece of social commentary. I don't think so much back then, but then again, I don't know much about counterterrorism in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we live in a post like major terrorism time, but yeah, so I don't know how much of a widespread issue it was back in the early 70s. So I think having him become like a radical revolutionary kind of terrorist, I don't think is like such a big deal as it would be today.
Yeah, I think that part of the movie would have particularly hit a chord with most people nowadays, especially about young people sort of being taken advantage of because they don't really have any direction in life and just being guided into that group mentality. And I think that this was probably done unintentionally, and I could just be reading into the movie, but I feel like the first situation that Fritz gets himself into, where he's smoking weed and trying to get laid with these women, is basically him living for himself. And then the situation where he starts the race riot is him trying to help as poorly as he's doing it, and as for all the wrong reasons that he's doing it, help other people. And then the last situation is just him being like, I have no idea what to do or how to get this culture that I think I need. And he just kind of falls into like the Nazi group because he really doesn't have any direction of his own. And he doesn't realize it until it's too late that he's like, oh, wait, these are bad people. I'm not going to plant this dynamite. And then boom. Like a Family Guy bit almost.
Yeah, and you think that maybe Fritz got his comeuppance, he is dead at the end, and nope, just starts into an orgy at the end, like you do.
Just like Sausage Party. So there you go. Fritz the Cat paved the way for Sausage Party.
I mean, in a roundabout way, yes, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting movie. I think it's worth checking out at least once in your life if you're a big animation historian kind of thing. Alex, is there any kind of parting words you want to say about Fritz the Cat?
Where does Fritz the Cat rank in your top 10 animated cats?
Man, I really have to think about it because there's a lot of good cat characters, man. You got Garfield, you got the cat from Cat Returns, and
Kitty Catwell from Tough Puppy.
Oh God,
I don't know if she counts, but I think she does. You have
God,
not including Nermal because Nermal doesn't count. Blaze the Cat, Big the Cat.
So if you want a good example of what a nice relationship is like, it is kind of this.
I don't know. I basically turned everything into Sonic at some point.
I could fill a 3-hour podcast, maybe even longer, of just Alex talking about Sonic lore, and that's just how that's gonna go.
Yeah, if you gave me the opportunity, I'd pull out all my comics right now and just start reading them on this podcast. This would turn into a very different show.
Yeah,
worse show.
Yeah.
A different show.
I mean, maybe.
Do you think, just before we totally wrap up here, do you think that Fritz the Cat is one of those movies that maybe every art student should watch before they start doing anything?
I don't know if it's something you need to watch before you start. I definitely think you should watch it.
I do think that the movie has a lot to say about people not working to their own personal strengths. Like, just people trying to create things that maybe they don't have any idea about. Like, Fritz wants to be a writer, but he knows he doesn't have any life experience, so he tries to go out and get some. I did give me a bit of a laugh when he burns all of his books and papers, and he's like, oh crap, my parents are gonna kill me. That was a good scene.
Definitely.
He burns down NYU.
What a dick.
What a jerk. Just because his roommates wouldn't talk, he burns down the whole school. Fritz the Cat is the most unhinged cat. Are you gonna watch the sequel after this?
I've watched the sequel. It's bad.
I haven't watched the sequel yet.
It is all of the debauchery with none of the substance.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
I would expect nothing less of a sequel of Fritz the Cat.
Exactly. Well, everybody, thank you all for tuning in. Again, I apologize for being frequent, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be around more again. And Alex, thank you for joining me. Hope you had an enjoyable time talking about a sex-crazed cat man.
Of course, and thank you for having me. I had a good time.
That's good. Well, everybody, again, thank you for listening. Stay safe. Hope to see you soon, and we'll talk to you again later. Bye.
Thanks for listening. You can find all the links to our social media pages in the episode description. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and join our Discord. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. The Ink and Paint Club is happy to be part of the Geekly Grind Podcast Network. We'll see you next time.